Hello and welcome to Midday Report here on TVP World. I'm Marie Cato. We begin our news bulletin by going live to our correspondents. Alex Kadier is in Istanbul, Turkey, and Angela Skujins in Tirana, Albania. Both of them have been following the events and talks between world leaders. Let's get the latest. The first direct talks between Ukraine and Russia since March 2022 have started in Istanbul. Our correspondent Alex Kadier is there for us. Good afternoon, Alex. A breakthrough seems unlikely at this stage. Is that correct?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. A breakthrough seems almost impossible based on the delegations sent. There are very little hopes for a breakthrough in these talks because of the participants. Of course, President Zelensky was here in Turkey. He said he was willing to have direct talks with what he sees as the only decision maker in Russia, that is President Vladimir Putin. So, of course, there was a hope that perhaps if those two leaders got together, some progress could be made. But nevertheless, those first talks, as you said, since March 2022, between a Russian delegation and a Ukrainian delegation. The Ukrainian side led by Rustem Umerov, the defense minister, the Russian side led by an advisor to President Vladimir Putin. Before the talks, there was a meeting between Marco Rubio, the U.S. Secretary of State, the Foreign Minister of Ukraine, the Defense Minister of Ukraine as well in the room before this meeting. The U.S. also met separately with Russia. But in the room itself, you have Hakan Fidan, the Foreign Minister of Turkey, moderating these talks. And as I said, both parties, we understand no handshakes at the start of this meeting. And while those two sides may be in the same room, their positions are still incredibly far apart. Marco Rubio himself saying the U.S. does not have high hopes for progress in these talks. And if there is no progress, of course, the question will then be, what will the reaction be from European leaders who had put pressure on the Kremlin to agree to a 30-day ceasefire this week? That seems incredibly unlikely. And on that topic of European reaction, I want to bring in my colleague Angela Skujins, who, as you mentioned, is at the European Political Community meeting in Tirana. Angie, you've been hearing from European leaders reacting to these talks. Crucially, you've also been hearing from President Zelensky. If you can bring us up to speed on exactly what he and his European partners said.
Yes, so we just heard from Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky addressing those 47 presidents and prime ministers from across Europe, as well as those aspirant EU member states. He said that European partners need to do more, keep exerting the pressure on Russia so that these sanctions and hopeful tariffs can bring the Kremlin to its knees, as well as keep amping up the pressure on Russian President Vladimir Putin to go, hopefully, to Turkey to address that Ukrainian president himself to hammer out a ceasefire proposal. Now, it comes off the back of other leaders addressing that they want to do more for the war-torn country. This includes European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen outlining the contours of the next sanctions package. This would be the 18th since Russia's full-scale invasion in 2022. Mark Rutte, NATO Secretary General, also offered scathing criticism regarding the performance of that Russian President Vladimir Putin, as well as why he didn't show up. Now, let's take a listen to both that European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen and Rutte themselves as they arrived at this EPC summit in Albania.
I think Putin made a mistake by sending a low-level delegation with this historian leading that delegation, who was also there in the talks in 2022. The ball is clearly in his part of the field now, in his court. He has to play ball. He has to be serious about wanting peace. So I think all the pressure is now on Putin.
We're working on a new package of sanctions. This package will include, for example, sanctions on Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2. It will include working on listing more vessels of the Russian shadow fleet and also lowering the oil price cap. And it will include more sanctions on the financial sector in Russia.
Yes, so while the hopes were perhaps diminished in Turkey during those talks, there is optimism here in the Albanian capital, despite the rain, that Europe will show up for Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky to continue offering their diplomatic and political support so he can hopefully find an end to the bloodshed. But that's all from me. I'll send it back to you in Warsaw.
Angela Skujins in Tirana and Alex Kadier in Istanbul. Many thanks for your reports. U.S. President Donald Trump has announced he will meet with Vladimir Putin as soon as it can be arranged. The statement came as he wrapped up his Middle East tour in Abu Dhabi on Friday.
When do you think you'll meet the President?
As soon as we can set it up. I said, they all said Putin was going and Zelensky was going, and I said, if I don't go, I guarantee Putin's not going. And he didn't go, and I understand that, but we're going to get it. We're going to get it done. We got to get it done. 5,000 young people are being killed every single week on average, and we're going to get it done.
The defense ministers of Poland, Germany, the United Kingdom, France and Italy, known as the E5, are meeting in Rome on Friday to discuss support for Ukraine and preparations for the upcoming NATO summit in June. Poland is represented by Defense Minister Władysław Kosiniak-Kamysz. The discussions will focus on key strategic issues, security challenges and strengthening European defence capabilities. According to the Italian Defence Ministry, coordinated support for Ukraine will also be a central topic as the war with Russia continues to threaten stability across the continent. The meeting, hosted at the headquarters of the Italian Air Force in Palazzo dell'Aeronautica, is part of an ongoing informal cooperation aimed at addressing current geopolitical challenges. The E5 format has already hosted gatherings in Paris, Warsaw and Berlin this year. This meeting comes as Russian and Ukrainian negotiators are also set to meet for their first direct talks in 3 years in Istanbul. Expectations for significant progress are tempered, however, as U.S. President Donald Trump recently said that no progress would occur without a meeting between himself and Russian President Vladimir Putin. The E5 ministers are expected to hold a press conference later today. Russia is using bombs against hotels where journalists live. The organization, Reporters Without Borders, condemned on Friday what they called Russia's deliberate strategy against media. According to an investigation, the aim of the attacks is to silence journalists. From the beginning of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022 to mid-March, Russian forces have attacked and damaged at least 25 hotels, according to an investigation by journalists and a report by Truth Hound, a Ukrainian organization that documents war crimes in the country. As a result of these attacks, last year, Ryan Evans, a British safety advisor who worked with the Reuters team, was killed in Kramatorsk. At least 7 other media workers were wounded in the attack. Most of the attacks took place at night when hotels were full of civilians. At least 15 of the strikes were carried out using Russian Iskander missiles, which are well known for their precision. Russia's President Vladimir Putin has replaced the country's commander-in-chief of the Russian ground forces, according to the Kremlin statement on Thursday.
Shortly after the dismissal, Oleg Salyukov, who had held the office since 2014, was appointed the Deputy Secretary of the Russian Security Council. The 69-year-old army general has thus become the right-hand man to Russia's former defense minister, Sergei Shoigu, who currently serves as the country's council secretary. The Security Council is presided over by Vladimir Putin and is tasked with managing Russia's national security policy. Salyukov, who is on most Western countries' sanctions list, was mostly responsible for Moscow's Victory Day parades.
3 people have been wounded after a wave of Russian drones fell on the Ukrainian region of Odessa on Thursday night.
One of the victims is in critical condition in the wake of the attack. The rain of unmanned aerial vehicles also destroyed a number of buildings, including private houses, public utility buildings and a garage. The Ukrainian State Emergency Service dispatched 10 units and 37 firefighters to battle blazes that broke out at the sites of the strikes.
Residents of Kyiv also woke up to a series of explosions as Russian drones targeted the city. According to local authorities, the attack resulted in a fire breaking out in the non-residential Sviatoshny district. No casualties have been reported in the Ukrainian capital so far.
The Ukrainian Air Force said the drones approached the city from the south and were tracked and engaged by Ukrainian air defense systems in the region. Responding to the attack, officials urged residents not to film or photograph the air defense efforts and remain in shelters until the all-clear signal is given. According to Mayor Vitaly Klitschko's post on Telegram, the drones reached Kyiv at 6:38 a.m. local time. The strikes came amid reports of a ballistic missile threat and ahead of the upcoming peace negotiations between Ukraine and Russia.
Ukraine lost an F-16 fighter jet while repelling a Russian attack overnight, the country's Air Force wrote on Telegram.
According to preliminary data, the pilot destroyed 3 air targets and was preparing to destroy a 4th when an extraordinary situation occurred on board. The pilot proceeded to fly away from a populated area and ejected from the aircraft. He was quickly found in good condition and evacuated from the area. The Air Force indicated that the crash did not appear to be caused by Russian fire, and the commission had been appointed to investigate the circumstances surrounding the incident. This is the 3rd F-16 that Ukraine has lost in combat as Russia continues its attack on the country. The first F-16s arrived in Ukraine on July 31, 2024. Kyiv has not disclosed the number of aircraft it has received. A coalition made up of Denmark, Norway, the Netherlands and Belgium pledged to donate some 60 planes.
Another 909 bodies have been returned to Ukraine following the repatriation process. The Ukrainian Coordination Headquarters for the Treatment of Prisoners of War reported on Friday. According to the statement, the soldiers' remains were returned from Russian-occupied territories and from Russia itself. Ukrainian officials thanked the Red Cross for its involvement. Ukrainian investigators will start the identification process for the fallen soldiers as quickly as possible. The last such exchange with Russia took place on April 18th, when the coordination headquarters also reported the return of 909 bodies of fallen soldiers to Ukraine. The news came just ahead of the Ukraine-Russia negotiation talks in Istanbul, which have now officially begun. At the European Union Military Committee meeting in Brussels on Thursday, General Wiesław Kukuła, Chief of the General Staff of the Polish Armed Forces, discussed NATO's response to recent incidents in the Baltic, where a Russian fighter jet violated Estonia's airspace. The incident occurred when the Estonian Navy was escorting the tanker Jaguar, part of Russia's Shadow Fleet. Kukuła emphasized that the alliance's actions will become more robust, with more forces involved and more decisive measures in place to respond swiftly to potential threats.
We discussed not just tactical matters, but also the future of Baltic operations and how we intend to respond moving forward. I can say with certainty that NATO's reaction to incidents like these will become more robust. We will engage greater forces and act more decisively. This means we'll demonstrate our readiness to respond more swiftly, for example, toward vessels or aircraft that refuse inspection or raise our suspicions. Will intercepts happen faster? Not necessarily, but our posture will clearly signal readiness.
There is an element of escalation, said Andrew Tettenborn, law professor from Swansea University, while speaking to TVP World about the recent incident in the Baltic Sea.
There is here an element of escalation, though I'm not sure whether we should exaggerate its importance. Russia fairly regularly makes small incursions into NATO airspace, essentially to see what's going to happen. And what's happened here is that it's done exactly that, though with the extra excuse that the vessel is undoubtedly running light, coming in to pick up some Russian oil.
2 people have been injured after a group of protesters clashed with the police in front of a courthouse in the Serbian city of Novi Sad. The demonstrators urged country authorities to release 6 activists detained earlier this year. The detainees, who are members of the movement of Free Citizens and Students Against Authoritarian Rule, have been in custody for 2 months in connection with the allegations of, quote, preparing an attack on the constitutional order and, quote, inciting violent change of the constitution. The perceived crackdown on the protesters has been branded by civil rights groups as a clear attempt to silence dissent. Nationwide protests in Serbia broke out after a concrete roof canopy of the Novi Sad railway station collapsed in November, killing 16 people. Protesters blamed the government for the catastrophe, citing negligence and corruption as the primary causes behind the collapse. And this brings us to the end of Midday Report here on TVP World. Thank you for joining us and stay tuned for more on TVP World. Goodbye.